Hello, I'm your host, Brian Callanan. How is the Seattle City Council responding to an uptick in violence in the city, alongside a continuing battle over police reform? Are we any closer to seeing a regional agency take control of our area's homeless crisis? And will a decision about the Showbox Theater's landmark status impact plans to tear it down? Councilmembers Pacheco, Bagshaw, and González join me to answer these questions and the ones you're sending in too, coming up on Council Edition.
Food and beverage tax is here to stay.
Renters aren't bad to the neighborhood. They don't somehow lessen neighborhood character.
And so I think it's in the best interest of the membership of SPOG and the city to come to the table as soon as possible.
All that and more coming up next on City Inside Out, Council Edition. And here we go with Councilmember Lorena González, Abel Pacheco, and Sally Bagshaw. Thank you very much for joining us. It is a very busy summer here, and Lorena, I want to start with you and talk about the police department. You sent a letter co-signed by Councilmembers Herbold and Mosqueda to Mayor Durkan recently. You're hoping to reopen the Seattle Police Officer Guild contract with the city, fix some problems that have the city at least partially out of compliance with these federally required reforms for the SPD. So a big concern here, I know, is that the mayor's plan to bring in some outside consultants on this issue could keep the city out of federal compliance for a long period of time. I know the federal judge is looking for some answers by August 15th. Where are we right now?
We now have an extension from the court. We have until August 15th to present something to the court. I have concerns about the something being presented to the court as defined by the mayor, and you know, I think what I've heard thus far, which is largely based on media reports as opposed to directly from the mayor's office, is that it's really going to be a work plan that is going to be presented. There's still a lot of questions about who's going to execute that work. Why are we doing this work plan? We did multiple years of work as both the city council, together with community members and other stakeholders, both in the city and outside of the city, to really try to define what are the reforms that make sense for our specific community. And I think we really need to stay true to what we identified, and as opposed to redoing all of the work. I just want to make really clear that we are not proposing to do this on our own. We are not proposing unilateral labor negotiations. We are proposing that we do this jointly and together. And in fact, the law requires there to be consensus amongst all of the parties to the contract in order to engage in a reopener.
What's SPOG saying? Can you give us any insight there?
Well, as far as you know, as far as I know, the mayor's office has not yet asked for those reopeners to happen. We do have a reopener on one issue that was identified by the court. I think it makes a lot of sense to start there. And I look forward to continuing to have conversations with our labor negotiators and with SPOG. And in fact, you know, really appreciate the fact that the SPOG president reached out to my office directly yesterday, wanting to have a one-on-one conversation. That is not labor negotiations. That is just having a conversation. I really do sincerely appreciate that good faith gesture.
A lot still ahead with that.
Thanks.
And
a lot more to come.
Yeah, we're going to broaden this out a little bit. Councilmember Pacheco, I wanted to make sure I pointed this out. Right as the story was unfolding, a short while before we taped this show, there was a rash of violence throughout the city over the weekend. A woman stabbed and killed at Cal Anderson Park, a citywide call out for officers at a fight that ended with a gun injury at Seattle Center, another gun injury at the waterfront. Police Chief Best held a press conference soon after that saying her department is stretched thin. Officers are leaving the department, quote, because they don't feel supported by public officials. Your reaction to that?
Well, having worked at the Police Foundation, I know a lot of good work that gets done by police officers. And, you know, I think Councilmember González outlined yesterday in her press conference actions that the council has taken with regards to supporting public safety in our city. And so, you know, I think that I want to be very specific and intentional about what I think Chief Best is talking about, which is there's a, you know, we have a colleague who's made some very explicit comments about, you know, police officers intentionally targeting and specific communities. And so I think those comments are both inflammatory in nature, don't reflect, I can't speak for everyone, but don't reflect, I think, don't reflect me and my viewpoints, but also I think they're not reflective of, they're not productive to the broader conversation of how do we have both constitutional policing and both the models for police accountability and police reform.
Yeah, and I guess, Sally, I'll bring you in here. You've served on the council for a decade, saw the SPD enter this consent decree in 2012. Right. It's been a very long process, and I know this isn't a situation where the city can unilaterally say, let's reopen negotiations with police, but can Seattle get to that spot where the mayor, SPOG, the council, the federal judge are on the same page within a month's time? I mean, this is the big question here. What do you think?
Well, frankly, we have to. And I think that's something that Councilmember González has been leading the council. I really respect what the mayor is doing. And of course, just what Councilmember Pacheco was saying, we have wonderful relationships with many of our police officers. I first got to know SPOG and many of the officers when I first ran for my first campaign. Yeah. They are people that work really hard. Mm-hmm. They're dedicated to the work they do. Mm-hmm. We've got to support them. And they know, too, that what the judge has asked for is constitutional policing. Yeah. I've not seen a police officer yet that doesn't want to conform to those principles and to do his and her job.
And Lorena, just to bring you back in here, is this something that potentially the council could revisit in 2020 when this current contract with SPOG expires, or what happens there? If
SPOG is not interested in coming back to the table to renegotiate the three limited areas that are of significant concern to me and that the judge agrees with, then we will be left with the only option, which is to renegotiate the entirety of the contract, not just the three limited issues, but everything in 2020. If that is to occur, then it would be my preference, and I think it would be reasonable and strategic for the city and for SPOG members, frankly, to come to the table as quickly as possible as 2020. We just finished negotiating a 2014 contract that we didn't ratify until 2018. That's 4 years of hard labor negotiations. Yeah. Given the issues that are currently on the table that I believe are lightning rods, like arbitration, I have no reason to believe that it's going to be a quick negotiation. So I think it's in the best interest of the membership of SPOG and the city to come to the table as soon as possible to really set those ground rules and to get to work sooner rather than later to avoid extreme delay. Ideal world, we come with an agreement before the end of 2020 that really does address the judge's concerns in a way that we will be able to get back into full and effective compliance with the consent decree. I think that's really important. Which is the goal here. Thank you very much for that. Sally, I'm going to move on. I want to talk about this plan to have a regional governance structure in place to deal with our homeless crisis. Council's talking about this right now over the summer. The hope is to have something in place before the end of the year.
Correct.
What does that regional structure look like? Who sits on the board? Who's paying for it? And I mentioned that last part especially because the city just passed this bill to make sure contracts with the Human Services Department keep up with inflation. There's dollars involved here too.
Right.
Tell me about this.
Well, this is not just within the city of Seattle, but King County.
Right.
We had a meeting with King County council members yesterday to talk about these issues. What's going to happen is a phased-in approach. So there will be some issues that we will be able to identify right away, particularly around services. What kind of services are we providing? What are the plans to help not only make Seattle a safer, cleaner spot, but taking better care of people who we're finding on the streets? But that means that we have to work with our regional cities as well. And many of you know the suburban cities don't necessarily want the same kinds of things the city of Seattle does.
Okay,
so what's it going to look like? Here's sort of the structure. Our intention will be something like a PDA, a Public Development Authority. The governing board, I think the best model that I've seen so far is out of Portland, Oregon, where Portland, Multnomah County, Gresham, and other cities come together. I'm hoping that the board will actually be small and nimble, so it will have service providers, people that don't have immediate contracts so that they're not having to take a situation where they have to step back and say, well, I've got a conflict, but also people with lived experience. And then the question is, who is going to represent the city and the county? Council members cannot at this point. We have a legal opinion that says we can't serve two jobs. We can't have city council and have a role in a new
state constitution piece.
In a new entity that is going to be making budget decisions. So I'm excited about the prospects. Coordinating county and the city, it's something that frankly I have been working on for almost a decade now because we don't want duplication. We want to be effective, we want people to get better, and we want to do it at a cost where we're not seeing the city, the county, and then a third entity paying money for the same thing.
Right.
So we've got a lot of work to do. I see a work plan coming out of this
Okay.
in 2019. I don't believe that it's going to be ready to go
Okay.
at the beginning of 2020.
Is there going to be new revenue needed for this plan? Or?
Well, there's plenty of revenue from the city and the county right now to get something started. But what we have seen, and this is from the studies that the Chamber did, Vulcan did,
Right.
and others, is that we need a real mass infusion of cash to make more housing available. Because people say, well, it's so problematic. Well, we know what's going to work.
Yeah.
A lot more housing, a lot more permanent supportive housing, having providers be able to do the work and then be able to invest in mental health and behavioral health and
All right.
addiction. So we're on our way, and I think it's a very positive step.
Abel, I'll bring you in here as we wait to see this regional plan unfold here. The Durkan administration has stepped up Seattle's efforts to remove homeless encampments. Seattle Times story showed this recently. 75% more camps have been removed in the first 4 months of this year compared to the same period in 2018. The emphasis appears to be on these smaller camps that don't require a 72-hour notice. The mayor says leaving people in inhumane, unsafe conditions is not a good strategy. I have a few comments on this one I wanted to throw your way to set this up. One writer says this: do more sweeps faster. Don't let the homeless start camping in the places where they have been removed. Or, I have noticed the difference with more encampment removals. I don't know whether it is resulting in more homeless accepting shelter, though. A lot going on here with these sweeps, and I wanted to make sure I got your comments on this as we talk about this regional program going forward.
Well, I think it's just part of the broader discussion on how divisive it's gotten, the issue of homelessness. You know, to Councilmember Bagshaw's point, just in terms of it being a regional issue, requiring a regional response, you know, it's somehow we got into, I think, to a point in our politic about just how, you know, we demonize folks who are experiencing homelessness.
Yeah.
There are many paths by which I think someone gets to being homeless, and the solutions to the issues of homelessness, and with regards to just the notion of sweeps, you know, we've talked to folks in committee, the folks from the navigation team who do the sweeps, and for the majority of them, they're trying to just do connect folks to services.
Right.
But we know we have just a jam in the system with regards to finding folks either short or permanent supportive housing.
Yeah.
Short-term or permanent supportive housing.
Got it. Lorena, let me bring you in here, because I know the city and county have been working on this for a long time, as Sally brought up here. It was interesting to me to hear the mayor and county executive saying we can end youth homelessness by the year 2021. Do you see that as a reasonable goal? And we actually received a question that was directed to you related to this topic on Instagram. Carlos writes this: I want to become a city council member, and I want to start my own nonprofit that supports low-income families and people suffering homelessness. Feedback on how to start my nonprofit as a 15-year-old would be great. Carlos, thank you very much for the note. If you'd like to use that as your setup for this bit here, I think a lot of people are concerned about this, Carlos included. But let me know about this idea of ending youth homelessness and this overall goal of teaming up with the county.
Sure. Well, first of all, greetings to Carlos. That's pretty ambitious at 15. I don't think I was thinking about those things at that age, to be fair. You know, I think the area of people experiencing homelessness in the youth population in particular has been the one area where we've actually seen some meaningful progress in terms of the strategies that we've had, both in the diversion context, in other words, making sure people don't enter into homelessness in the first place, but also on the side of getting people rapidly rehoused. And so I think that's, you know, a lot of opinions about the one night count and the accuracy and meaningfulness of that. But the one area where there was pretty broad agreement was the progress that we've made as a region on tackling youth homelessness. At the City of Seattle, I'm really proud that our Families in Education Preschool Promise Levy investments actually include a $7 million investment over 7 years to address students experiencing homelessness. And so I think there's a really promising collaborative effort coming together between public agencies and philanthropy around how do we meaningfully turn the tide on this particular population experiencing homelessness. I think that anytime we set a marker, like we will end this by 2021, it's pretty ambitious. I think it's hopeful to have that goal, and I think we should have sort of ambitious goals, but certainly don't want the public to walk away with the impression that they will never see a youth experiencing homelessness after 2021. But we do have an obligation to, obviously, particularly for that population, do everything we can to turn the tide, and I think that all signs, objective criteria point to the fact that we are.
And I think we
Please.
can really say thank you to many of our providers, Youth Care as an example,
Right.
where they have upped the ante, they have opened their own doors for longer periods of time, and they're also finding co-sponsors for things such as getting youth identified early on, finding mentors for them,
Yeah.
and what we know is that as the youth come in, their number one request is for a job.
Yeah.
And getting them connected with some of the apprenticeship programs, I think, has been really valuable. And we're not doing this by ourselves. I mean, other cities around the country have been really successful on targeted areas. Youth is one of them, veterans is another. I believe that we can make a real difference because finally, I think our region is recognizing government can't do it all. Business, philanthropy, labor is going to have to be our partners, and I see people stepping up.
Very good point. I need to shift gears if I could. And Councilmember Pacheco, I want to talk about the Showbox Theater. So here we are, taping the show a day before the Landmarks Board vote to designate this building at First and Pike as a city landmark. Important to point out that would not guarantee that the Showbox would remain a music venue. That only deals with the physical building. This other effort, though, the city's temporary extension of the Pike Place Market Historical District, which would have an impact on the building's use. You were the sole vote against that back in June. I want to talk to you about why you voted that way, your concerns about this project going forward.
Sure. Well, first, I think one of the big challenges is that we can't landmark a feeling. And I think that in itself is part of where the sense of nostalgia, and I think this is part of the broader conversation that's happening in our Seattle politics, which is, Seattle that once was and the Seattle that will be. We know we have a housing shortage, and so, we have to build, and I've been a strong proponent of transit-oriented development, and so ensuring that we can build more housing, but building more housing intentionally around transit is something that's a priority. It's been a priority for the city. MHA is law of the land. And so my concern was partly that there was the opportunity cost with regards to the $5 million payment for MHA.
Yeah, and Lorena, I'll bring you in here because I know you supported this temporary extension of the historical district, but you did raise some concerns about housing too. There's a building owner that's suing the city right now who doesn't want a theater there. The lease is up in the year 2024. It appears to me the only way out of this mess is to have another investor come in and buy the property. Do you think that's true, and is that possible before December when this extension runs out?
Well, of course, the city recently received a non-favorable opinion from the judge that found that the temporary extension and the temporary act in the first place was illegal based under land use law. So we obviously are going to respect that order. My initial vote on the first action and then the extension was really a vote in support of studying the various options that might be before the city council and community in terms of moving forward with identifying other potential venues or an opportunity to develop that potential venue into additional arts and cultural space, which is, I think people really want to continue to have in the city, and we don't want to just sort of, be flippant about not having those spaces in a vibrant urban city. You always see these cultural spaces, and so for me, it was really about taking a judicious approach around studying additional options that might be available without necessarily endorsing one of those options over the other. We're now in a situation where that studying is not occurring because of the court's order, and so now really what we're left with is the possibility of a landmark designation that will still inherently create restrictions for how that parcel will be developed in the future.
Sally, this is a well-loved building in your district. What do you think the best option is here going forward?
Well, that's a question we have now had our frankly, from the court, we had our ears pinned back. So I think we're going to have to, first of all, as Councilmember González said, we are honoring what the court said. I think there is a possibility still of the music community coming around and providing another bid. When they first approached us, they said, that's what we want to do. We want to take this over. We want to put up an offer for the property owner that will be competitive. We'll see. I suspect that we'll be moving forward. I think one of the best options is, can you leave the first floor and build on top of it for the housing on top, but to allow the Showbox as we know and love it to continue. My understanding is there are possibilities. It's an engineering feat to do.
You got to talk to the neighbors on the second floor.
But if that can be done with sort of that flying buttress cantilever over the top, it's possible.
Okay,
And
all right.
Just briefly, just add, I think
Yeah.
that's the hope, and obviously I think when we work
The
together,
win-win,
we
yeah.
can make it happen. So.
Okay, all right. Thank you for all that.
Yeah, of
I'm
course.
going to pick up the pace just a little bit and head back to you, Sally. An issue that could impact your role as budget chair. The State Court of Appeals says a city tax on the wealthy is unconstitutional, but,
Yeah, but-
cities are allowed to tax net income. I thought this was
Right.
really interesting, a significant decision, all set up for the Supreme Court now. What does this mean?
Well, it's not going to mean anything for this year's budget.
Okay.
It's possible in the future that we will have some additional tools. We'll see what the court says.
Okay, all right. Abel, I'll head to you. The city has passed a measure making it easier to build accessory dwelling units, these ADUs, backyard cottages. You've lived in these types of units before, and I really appreciate your perspective here. I know some critics would say this is going to create a developer frenzy for ADUs. A lot of people saying a few different things about this. What impact do you think this new ruling is going to have?
Well, I think, again, it's just to the broader conversation, we have to reframe all of these conversations. I think part of it is saying we're all neighbors. Renters aren't bad to the neighborhood. They don't somehow lessen neighborhood character. I'm a renter myself, and so I'm just as engaged.
You're not
and
such
involved.
a bad guy.
Yeah, I'm just
right.
as engaged and involved in my community as anybody else. And so I think part of it is just reframing that conversation, saying, look, we need a little more density. We need more housing. We know we need that, and so people can be engaged and be a renter.
Well, what's the talk been in your district there?
In district, I can tell you that most folks have been pretty supportive.
Okay.
One of the first things I learned early on was just folks are really supportive. I'm going to repivot a little bit in this conversation
Please.
because folks are really supportive of a lot of the things the council is doing. And one of the things I've been intentionally trying to do is trying to get as much of the word out about the things that we are doing. And as such, there was an amendment in there to have SDOT look into how do we incentivize, not just incentivize additional bike parking on DADUs, but also incentivize or look into modes of or ways that we can provide bike parking within single-family neighborhoods as our neighborhoods change.
Right.
So I've been really trying to be intentional about how we promote those efforts in my district.
Okay, thank you for that. Lorena, let's talk hotel workers legislation. Voters approved I-124 in Seattle in 2016 to protect workers in large hotels. That issue's been tied up in the courts ever since. Now you're trying to do a legislative route on this. What do you hope comes out of this? How do you respond when people like the Washington Hospitality Association say this is an overreach? I want to make sure we tackle this, please.
Well, I think first and foremost, we want to be true to the voter intent. It's pretty clear to us that voters who voted on this issue overwhelmingly endorsed this initiative in November of 2016. And so I think it's important for us to do that. Also, I think it's important for us to make sure that we are staying true to our commitment to protecting of what I believe to be a vulnerable workforce. So we're talking about women, mostly immigrants, mostly people of color, a lot of folks who do not speak English at all, who have no idea what their labor rights are because they're in this country from a different country, which has a different legal system.
Yep.
So this is a population that could really be taken advantage of and has been getting taken advantage of in these situations. So the call to the question is do we believe that women, particularly these women, should be protected from sexual assault and sexual harassment in the workplace? I think the answer is yes. Do we believe that this population is deserving of health care? I think the answer to that is resoundingly yes, particularly because we know the rate of injury for housekeepers is actually larger than coal mine workers. This is a really important piece of legislation that really is going to send a statement about who we are as a city and who we value and why we value their work. And so I feel really strongly about making sure that this legislation is going to fully protect women and other workers in hotels.
I was just thinking about this as you brought this up, and maybe we can try to do the 30-second version here.
Sure.
But so much happening at our country's borders when it comes to immigrants coming into this country. I know the Seattle City Council has been concerned about that. Your thoughts about what's happening right now? What can the council do in these types of situations, please?
Well, it's obviously very demoralizing as somebody who comes from an immigrant community, as somebody who came up in the immigrant rights justice movement. It's very personal for me, and it's an embarrassing mar on our American history right now to see that we have a zero tolerance policy that quite literally results in the caging of children and the tearing of children out of their mom and dad's arms for political and racist, xenophobic motives. And I think that is this is a hard moment for us all as Americans, and we have a moment and an opportunity to here in Seattle and King County in general to double down and reinforce our investments in the resiliency of our immigrant communities. We live in a global world, so we know that we have people who are living in our communities, in our neighborhoods, who have family and relatives who are suffering through that family separation, zero tolerance policy. Really important for us to stay true to our investments in that community.
Yeah, 1 out of 5 people in this city were not born in this country. It's
right.
an important piece. Sally, I wanted to jump quickly on what's next with the sweetened beverage tax. And I know this is a big one here. Revenue from this was supposed to go towards health programs for the communities impacted most by these sweetened beverages. The money appears to be going to the general fund instead, problem one, and it appears this tax might not be working in the way it should. Revenue's way up. People aren't necessarily changing their habits here. Is it time to get rid of this tax, or what do you think?
Oh, no, and we just passed, after multiple meetings and conversations about it, legislation that it will really restore about $21 million back to the original intention of where the money was going to be invested.
Okay.
And it's all good stuff. It's what we want. It's for helping people where they've got food deserts or food deficiencies, the kind of proactive effort to say, hey, look, there's other alternatives than a certain product that we're trying to avoid. But that said, the whole conversation in the council, I felt, was really well intended because there were multiple things that we were investing the money in, and we have by unanimous decision now said we're going to take the money back from what we had invested in last year, what we had in the endorsed budget. And it was good things. I mean, it was parent-child investments, but we've got to find $6.5 million coming in, and as we had previously discussed, we can take the budget and turn it on its head and decide how we're going to spend the money. So sweetened beverage tax is here to stay. It's not going to be expanded because of what the state legislature and voters did last year. So what we have is what we've got for the next few years.
All right. Abel, quick one, a letter from the mailbag to throw your way about making a living in the city. Kelly throws this one via Instagram, and thank you very much for throwing that our way. Why should non-tech workers have hope for the future here? Talking about affordability in the city. What do you think?
Well, I think, Seattle's a growing city and it's a vibrant community. And so, there's a lot to be excited about. But I think the broader issue of affordability, housing more specifically, and that is concerning for many people, and I would say young people too. Young people are challenged with student debt. And so, we're struggling on I'm still young at heart, 32.
That's still pretty young.
That counts as young at this table. All right.
But, we're trying to be mindful of just how the broader issues of affordability. And so I think there's a lot to be excited about, but I think we have to keep that front and center about how we can ensure that folks, regardless of income and where you fall on the income scale, have a place to live.
All right. And I wanted to make sure I wrapped up. Lorena, big news for your family, expecting your first child in January. First things first, congratulations. You look great. Hope you're doing well. How does it, if you could take the 20-second version here, how is this impacting your job going forward, and I guess how you approach this position in the city council?
I'm really excited to join the ranks of millions of working moms across the country. My own mom had 6 kids. And was a migrant farm worker, so I feel like if she can do that, I can pretty much do anything. But really excited about continuing to center even more of my work on what it means to be a working family in a city that is growing in its nature of being unaffordable and really sort of I'm getting a first-hand view of just how bad this child care desert is, particularly for infant care. And I think anytime you have a council member who is making really important policy decisions, who has that first-hand experience, you're going to get better policy. So I'm excited about that.
And I would like to say that Councilmember Mosqueda and I and Councilmember González have been working on a child care facility in City Hall for the last couple of years. And I think that we've got strength in numbers now. We're going to see it here, or we're going to see it across the street, and we have an architect design going. This is going to happen within the next year.
All right, we'll see how that goes. Thank you all, and we will see you next time on Council Edition.